How would you ever know if your solar and battery system isn't working right? All modern solar systems have an app or a website at least to help you monitor production, look for errors, and honestly, just have a lot of fun. If you're not looking at a great mobile app, you could be really disappointed with your solar system because it's really the window into that production. If you don't understand how your solar is producing, you could be missing out on a ton of fun and a lot of money. I'm Joel Robinson, founder, pilot, builder, and solar entrepreneur in Montana. And I want to educate you on all the things about renewable energy so that you can evaluate those products yourself and make a great choice. With solar panels and batteries, sometimes you can just do things that are really fun or save a ton of money. I'm on a mission to save $100 million in the next 5 years. Join the revolution and help me build the momentum. All modern solar inverters come with either a mobile app or at least a website that track the daily production and the status of all the components. So these can be things like production, battery state of charge, error messages, and even applying firmware updates. If you didn't have this mobile app, how would you know what was going on? You really wouldn't. A lot of inverters don't have a very big display, and honestly, most modern inverters, they don't have any display at all. So there's no way of knowing what's going on unless you use the mobile app. So not all apps are created equal, and those that have a great app are much more enjoyable and have much better information. So as you're looking at different solar systems, and really it's the inverter, you need to look at the mobile app and look at it closely because it's going to be the window into the solar system for the next 25 years. One of the keys to maximize solar production is being able to recognize the daily, weekly, or even monthly pattern that's inside those solar production apps. These help you understand what each panel's doing, the battery state of charge, if there's any errors, and honestly, just let you follow along and understand how solar works. I truly began to understand how solar systems work by monitoring each of my customers' apps and looking out the window, seeing how much sun there is or how much cloud there is, and then looking at that mobile app and translating that to every day. It gave me that in-depth knowledge of how solar systems work. And one of the things that's so important is understanding the patterns. Solar has a really distinct pattern, and learning to identify what each of those patterns are will help you identify issues up front, get them corrected to make sure your production is at its maximum. A couple things that are important to understand is that these systems have to be connected to the internet. They're literally Internet of Things or IoT devices that are out in the field with a lot of different sensors and data points. It all funnels back to the app. One simple issue that we see is that they go offline. Someone changes their password, changes internet provider, upgrades a modem or something like that, and the solar system goes offline. Now, it doesn't mean that the data is lost, and certainly doesn't mean the system's off. It's still working. You just can't monitor it. It's logging the data locally, and most inverters will store that information on the inverter until it's reconnected. That data will upload. Usually we hear that it'll upload 1 day per minute. So if it's been offline for a few months, take a while for the data to upload, but it should all be there after it comes back online. Why it's so important is if these aren't monitored or at least occasionally monitored, there could be a problem that you're not aware of. And that's going to limit your production, which will reduce the value of the system and increase the payback period. As a solar installer, production is the most important thing. It's where the most value is. It's where the dollars are. We need to make sure those systems are producing. So pattern recognition is extremely important. The best way to detect an issue isn't always through an alert or an alarm. Sometimes things don't have an alert or alarm, and instead the only way to identify them is through a pattern. So I teach pattern recognition because they show up over time. And being able to recognize that pattern is a key way to get the issue corrected, get production back on time. So let's talk about what are the patterns in the solar world. Well, first one is pretty easy. We're talking sunrise and sunset every day. The sun comes up at a certain time, sets at a certain time. The solar production is going to follow those times. Production will start after sunrise. It takes a little while for the system to start up, and it will actually stop before sunset because the inverters have a minimum voltage requirement. So each day there's a curve, a production curve that generates, starts out the smallest at sunrise, grows through midday until we're at our peak, which is noon or 1, depending on where you're at, and then it slowly starts to taper off throughout the day. We don't get maximum production all day long. Instead, it's a gradual increase over time to a peak, which may be only brief or for a short period of time, and then we start to see the decline. So that real-time production is only at peak for a short period of time. Now, being able to monitor each individual panel requires a module level power optimizer, or MLPE, module level power equipment. That's the generic term for a microinverter or an optimizer. Those give you reporting at a panel level and allows you to see every panel and what it's producing, both in real time and over the course of a day or a week or a period. Those are really important to have because one individual panel could be underproducing and you never know it with a straight string inverter. That's why it's so valuable to have those module level power equipment or a micro behind every panel, so that when we're looking at our mobile app, we can clearly see a pattern across all the solar panels that will help us identify any issues. So this daily production curve is really important. And most of my customers tell me, Joel, I didn't realize how important the app was. I look at it every day. I absolutely love this. They share it with their friends and their family. We've even heard of people having contests or estimations based on production. So it can be really fun. Other people, they don't need another app. We already have enough apps and they don't want to do it. But it is important that you understand the daily production curve, and we're looking for issues just to make sure we capture or identify a problem as soon as we can to make sure we're at maximum production. The system needs to produce at its designed output all the time, so we can capture as much value as possible. And you'll hear me emphasize that over and over again. And the mobile app's the best way. The best way, because that tells you what's going on. Now, the next level is that we need to understand the patterns and what's a normal pattern versus an irregular pattern. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of those right now that are subtle or kind of hard to see unless you know what you're looking for. First thing I want to talk about is clipping. Clipping occurs when an inverter limits the output of the solar panel because the system is producing more than it's rated. Clipping is usually represented on a graph by a flat peak or a flat plateau for a certain period of time. It's usually hard to identify unless it's a sunny day. So full sun day, nice and clear, no clouds. We can see clipping at the peak of the production because we're going to see a normal production curve that's nice and round and it's growing. And then we're going to see a flat peak across the top. Sometimes this is normal. Sometimes systems are designed to clip under ideal conditions, but it can also be symptomatic of a problem or potentially an undersized inverter. Choosing the correct inverter for the size of the solar system is part of the design process, and that proposal should be done by an expert who chooses the correct inverter. They've been trained on the region and the equipment that's out there. But if you're interested, I always recommend going to the National Renewable Energy Laboratories product called PV Watts. Just plug in your address and your approximate electrical usage. And that's going to give you an idea of how much you should produce at your location. So clipping is one pattern that we see in the mobile app that's really important to understand. It doesn't necessarily come with an error message or a problem. You may not see it in real time. Clipping only occurs at certain times of the day. All right, second pattern that I always want people to understand are obstructions. Inside that production curve, we're going to see a dip or some kind of change in production that shows up almost every day, close to the same time. What could it be? Most likely there's a tree or maybe a chimney stack that's in the way. Each day we see that production curve follow a typical pattern, and then all of a sudden it changes. It could be a dip or some type of change in production, and that's because the sun is passing behind that chimney and it's casting a shadow over the solar patterns, and that pattern shows up in the mobile app. And if you understand this pattern and see that it's normal or expected, that's fine. And it should be included in the production estimates. If you have a good solar installer who does a site assessment, they're going to identify those obstructions, which ultimately result in shading, reduces production. So those numbers are going to be less if we correctly identify the obstructions. So if you go to NREL's product, PV Watts, it's a great product. It's a database of all the irradiance. It's, they've tracked it over time and they know exactly how much sun that you get at your location, but they don't know your obstructions. They don't know how many trees you have. It's guessing that you're in a field, or it's assuming you're in a field, and it's not correctly identifying it. Sometimes people are taken advantage of because we're using these estimates or national numbers for production, and we're not localizing it to the individual home. We've got a couple great big trees that are in front of where the solar is going to be. It's going to be less than PV watts. Those numbers in PV watts are going to be optimistic, which means it says you're going to save more than you actually will, which means your payback could be different. So make sure that when you get an estimate from a solar installer, it represents the obstructions correctly. And to confirm that after the install, you're going to see it in your mobile app. You're going to see a specific pattern that it follows every day. You might have a couple jumps when the sun hits those panels directly. Another great pattern, this one's a little more obvious, but it's worth talking about, that you'll see in a mobile app is east-west roof designs. So not all houses have a south-facing roof, especially not big enough to handle an entire array. So many solar installers will put an array on the east and an array on the west, or multiple. So this pattern will show up in the mobile device as well. And this is where a good mobile device or a good mobile app will have a big difference than a junky one, is that it'll help you understand why the east-facing array produces more in the morning than the west-facing array. And in the evening, that west-facing array will produce more, or it will catch up, so that by the end of the day, those east and west-facing arrays will produce the same. And if you were to scroll back through prior days and look for the pattern, you're not really going to see it there, because east-west facing production patterns are only seen in real time or during that day. It's very hard to identify afterwards that this there. Now, inside the mobile app, it should have a little layout or realistic design of the home, and it should be labeled east and west so that you have a good idea. But if you don't have a good mobile app, you might not know the difference. It'd be very hard to diagnose a problem. So that's 3 really distinct patterns. There's lots of them, tons and tons of patterns to recognize, especially once we see batteries into the picture. I really emphasize the mobile app. You gotta know how this stuff works. And if you don't have a good mobile app, you might not use it as much might not like it as much. Honestly, we think they're amazing. And learning those patterns will help you understand what's going on with the system and potentially spot a pattern that's costing you production, which is ultimately costing you more. There's a lot more that I can share with you, and I want to give you the confidence and information so that when you are ready to buy a solar system, you're knowledgeable and you understand how these systems really do work. Flying blind is not a good way to manage this fairly large investment. So that mobile app is a window into production, state of charge, errors, and even these patterns as well. And all modern systems have good mobile apps, all right? Tesla, Enphase, lots of them have great apps. They're real rich. They're part of the support feature, but it does require that they're connected to the internet. So going into thinking about buying a solar system, just know it needs to be connected to the internet. You're going to have an app, and it's going to give you both real-time data as well as historical data. And it's going to help you spot patterns that are really indicative of production and consumption, potentially errors, shading, clipping, all types of information. And understand this ahead of time. You might understand then, does it make sense to have microinverters or optimizers or potentially just string? Because microinverters and optimizers, they give really good data. They really show you at individual module how it's producing, but they're more expensive. String is classic, much cheaper. It's much easier. It's the classic design. It's very simple. You don't have these extra little computers. It's not a computer, it's a computer underneath the solar panel sending out information. But sometimes it's really necessary. And I think you should understand the mobile app ahead of time, and before you purchase the solar system, think, oh, I wonder what their app's like. I should probably look at it ahead of time. So click the link below to subscribe so I can share more information on how to utilize this great net technology to improve our lives. That's what we really think. We think renewable energy makes our lives better. We're not so worried about saving money or the way it looks. It's truly changing our lives. It's a paradigm shift. And I say forget about politics and all the brainwashing. This stuff's just straight up amazing. The first time you ever plug in a solar panel and you see it start to produce, it's just a whole new feeling. And I just love it. So one thing that's important is I have a simple spreadsheet that helps you calculate your total energy usage. And if you download that and plug in all the energy you use from multiple sources, it will give you a great starting point for a budget. How do you know how much you want to spend? How much should I spend on a solar system? Should I get batteries? Should I get a water heater? How about an electric car? Well, a lot of that starts with budget. And to have at least an idea of how much money you're going to spend on energy in the next 10 years is a great starting point. That's an awesome place to start with the budget. You don't have to spend that much, but let's think about it. So I also have a great 5 bullet point items on things you should consider before going solar. Just gives you a few things to think about. It's very simple. They're very easy. But I see many customers come and ask questions about solar. Say, hey, I'm interested. I've heard this is very interesting. And right away, the salesman asks them a bunch of questions that they haven't thought about. And it kind of catches them off guard. So I just want you to be educated enough before you start that conversation so you can answer those questions. Like, yeah, I have a south-facing roof. Or, no, I don't want a battery necessarily, but I do have an electric car. Okay, so that conversation can go much smoother, which means you're more educated, you're more confident, and ultimately you make a better decision about a system that you're probably going to keep for a long time. Probably 25 years, maybe even more. It's really important that you know your electric bill, your shading in your individual house. No solar proposals are identical. Okay, they're all a little bit different. Even for two houses that are really similar, maybe in a subdivision, maybe they're identical. Let's just say it that. The occupants of that home might be different. One house might have a family of 5, and another one, just a single guy out by themselves. One house might have an electric car, other has all gas vehicles. So there's no cookie cutter solar proposal. People ask, how much does solar cost? Well, we always ask for an electric bill and an address. Always. We really can't do a proposal without it. And so that means that your proposal is unique to you and your property. Help me build the channel. Click subscribe. Watch more videos. Learn everything you can. Please comment. Tell me what else you want to have covered. I've got so much information, but I don't always know what you want to hear.